welcome back to the channel. Today I got a pretty exciting project that we're going to start. We're going to be doing a traditional Tanto. It's not going to be fully traditional, only because I haven't been traditionally trained. So it's going to be as close as we can get. We're going to be using some high dollar materials. So this is, I already forged the blade, so you won't be seeing that. I already heat treated it. I will be repolishing this. I did learn a lot about polishing hamones since this has been forged. This was forged quite some time ago. And thankfully I have a very patient client, that is giving me the time to do it right. Because the reason I decided to start filming this was because I had made a mokumegane habaki. And it fits very nicely and everything's all good. Mokumegane has a little bit of silver right there that I was going to engrave into. But unfortunately, it has a crack. And you'll see it right here. So because of that, I've already tried silver soldering it. I've tried fixing it. I couldn't get anything to take. The next step would probably be brazing, but I don't want, if the habaki was messed up to begin with, I don't want to have to repair it to put it on this piece. I want the habaki to be nice and solid from the get-go. So we're just going to go ahead and reforge the entire thing. This is just going to be a physical reminder of how to do things better. And there's things about this habaki too that I would have liked to do, like make it thicker. There's things that could have been, filed a little bit more even, things of that nature. So we're going to correct all of that in this second go. So today's portion of the video is going to be forging the habaki. I have some other mokumegane that I made a long time ago actually, that this came from. So we're going to use mokumegane from the same billet that I made, and you'll see the process on how I make a habaki. So I decided against the mokumegane. I'm going to go with some 1/4-inch copper that I had left over from a previous project. And I'm going to make the habaki out of that. I plan on doing some really cool file work on it, and that's kind of a waste if you're using mokumegane, to be honest, because you're just not going to really see the pattern. So I'm just going to go with regular copper. Because the copper was kind of an odd shape, all I'm doing right here is I'm just trying to get it to where it's essentially is a decent rectangle. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just something a little more even to work with. So I'm actually heating it in the forge in between forging sessions. The reason why I bring that up is because you can forge this after annealing it, which you'll see me do later. But when I'm trying to move a massive amount of copper without it cracking or becoming too brittle, I heat it just to the point where it's going to want to melt. And as I take it out of the forge and get it to the the anvil, it's cooled just enough to where I can really move a lot of it without risking work hardening the piece. And so what you saw me just do right there is I just created what I like to just call a wing. And what I'm doing is I'm actually separating the sides of the habaki right now. They're going to wrap around the blade. And I'm creating a raised area in the center, which is going to be the top of the habaki. Now that centerpiece, you want to have it roughly the same width as your blade, your tang. And so what I do here is I'm essentially starting to bend it so that I can work the center of the piece, because what I want to do is I want to create a cavity for the spine of the tang to go in. And to clarify a little bit, the reason why I'm bending it is as you bend it, that little cavity that you're making for the spine is going to want to close in on itself. So you kind of have to ensure that you're keeping that little cavity that you're creating open as you get it closer and closer to being able to wrap around the blade. So again, I'm just making that cavity for the spine of the tang just more distinct. And then I'm going to throw it back in the fire. One of the things that I've learned over many failures of making habakis is you don't want to overwork the piece. You'll get really close to being done, and then you get a little bit antsy, a little bit impatient. You try to overwork the piece, and then it cracks or something. I tried making a couple habakis out of brass, and brass is... I'll probably never make a habaki out of brass. Let's just put it that way. All right, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another cavity, and I'm going to use that same 1/4 inch piece of steel, and I'm going to knock down a part on the top of the habaki, and this is creating a space for the mune machi, and that's essentially the back of the spine that meets the tang. It's like a little notched area. Alright, so now I'm getting close to wrapping it around the blade. So now I'm going to want to quench it in water and anneal the copper, and because I don't want a super hot piece of copper around the blade, because that could possibly ruin the heat treat that I have already on the blade. What this is doing though, annealing the copper, is making it soft enough for me to work it, but as I start working it, copper tends to do what's called work hardening, so it becomes harder and harder the more you hit it, which means if you overwork the copper, then you could crack it, ruining all the work that you've done up to that point. So I'm wrapping the habaki around the blade, and I'm doing even hits like on either side. I'm looking at where the gaps are, and like I said, I'm going back and forth on both sides so I can try and keep everything even and straight. One of the things that will happen if you stay on one side for too long is you'll make one of the sides of the habaki too thin. I also like using a lot more material than I need, and that just ensures that just in case my bending was uneven or something was uneven or messed up in some sort of way, I have enough material to play with to fix it. And as you can see, it's fitting really well. It's looking pretty good so far. Now it's time to get rid of the excess material, although I'm going to leave more there than I think I need, and this is you'll see why here in a second. Once I cut this, I need to actually create a small piece that I'm going to put in that little hole right there, that little triangular hole on the bottom of the tang. We need to fill that with copper. But prior to making that triangular piece that's going to fill that gap, I'm just going to get rid of some of the burrs that the grinder created, because I need everything to be nice and clean and crisp, in preparation for the solder. And here's the piece of copper that we're going to use. I'm going to have to file this down into a small triangle, a elongated triangle, and it's going to fit within that little gap. Now this is such a pain in the ass. Now you can use the grinder for this, but I found that at times I grind a little bit too much, and also the grinder creates a ton of heat with the copper, so I've lost the piece a couple times, like in the past with past habakis. So I'm just gonna go ahead and file it. I'm just gonna, bite the bullet and eat the time. So my phone ran out of batteries, so I had to take pictures after the fact. This right here is the elongated piece of copper. You can see how tiny this is. It just needs to fill that gap as closely as possible. You can see it up against the tang, and the reason why it's sticking out is because of that, what's called a hamachi, and that's the notched area. It's where the edge meets the tang. And so I'm going to use some flux, some paste flux for the solder. Either I just don't prep the materials good enough, or it's not like forge welding steel, because if I don't use flux, I tend to have issues. So I'm going to go ahead and dip that piece of copper in the flux, and then wipe it within the little crevice and give it a shot. Now it's important that you don't just randomly put that piece in there at any sort of length. So what I do is I put the habaki on the tang, and then I stick that triangular piece in that little gap all the way up to where it touches the hamachi. Once it's good, I take the habaki off. Now it's set to the exact length that I need it, and then I put it on a piece of refractory brick to get it ready for the solder. This is a solder that I'm using. I just got it at the big box store at Home Depot. They have some better ones out there that have a higher melting temperature, but this is what I got, so that's what I'm going to use. And really the only reason why I would need something with a higher melting temperature is if I was going to do some sort of other soldering. You can do multiple solders by doing your first solder with something with a high melting temp, and then doing your second soldering with something with a lower melting temp, so you don't ruin the first solder you did when you're trying to do the secondary one. So as you saw, I heated up the habaki until the solder melted and filled all the gaps, and it fits perfect. One of the things you can see is that actually that little triangular notch doesn't touch the tang. I didn't realize that in the beginning, but here's the moment of truth. When I'm grinding it, it didn't actually matter whether or not that triangular piece was touching the tang or not, because it was a failure. It didn't stay. I don't know if I was using way too low of a grit, or just didn't solder correctly. But I went ahead and off camera made a second one. This one's a lot beefier. This one fits way better. I'm glad that I did it a second time. And this time I'm only going to heat it enough to melt the solder, and that's it. The last time I overheated it, I think some of the solder probably leaked all the way through. I have a couple ideas of what went wrong from before, but this time I learned from my mistakes, and we'll see if it works. And look at that. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to see. You can see where the copper melded with the rest, was soldered together with the silver, and then you have a silver line where the silver solder, closed that gap within the habaki. Now I'm going to get rid of the rest of the material, or the excess material, and see if everything fits just like it did last time. And it doesn't. This is just how it goes. You have one success just to run into another issue. Knife making is all about problem solving. What ended up happening is I had a little bit too much solder in there. It built up in some of the areas that were previously very tightly fit. So it created, a raised area, and it just wouldn't fit. And as you'll see, I go through a lot of little filing with a jeweler's file to try, and it's like you have to file it, test fit, file it, test fit, file it, test fit. It can be an agonizing process, but once you get it, it's all worth it. And right here, I'm actually making a space for the hamachi, because actually a lot of people don't know this, but with Japanese blades, part of the blade is not sharpened right where the hamachi is. And what that allows for people to do, it's actually protected by the habaki, and that allows you to check the hamachi, compared to the rest of the blade, and it'll show you how worn down the blade actually is, or how tired the blade is what most people say. But all right, it's nice and fitted. Let's see how everything fits. And it fits perfect. Very few gaps. The gaps that you see will go away once I file everything to its final shape. So I'm super pleased with that. Very glad that I reforged this habaki, because this is going to look way better than the last one. And that's it for this episode. This was just the forging. The next one's going to be all the filing and finished work of the habaki. So I'll see you on the next episode.